A sacred mountain no one is allowed to climb, with a temple said to hold incredible secrets at its base. Hidden caves, top secret ancient archives, these are forbidden archaeological sites experts are not allowed to enter. Mount Kailash in Tibet is one of the most mysterious and sacred mountains in the world. It's considered the spiritual center of the universe by Hindus and Buddhists. In fact, it's so sacred that no one is allowed to climb it. The locals firmly believe that attempting to scale it would bring bad luck or even total disaster. There's also a temple at the base of the mountain which is said to hide all sorts of secrets. As for what those secrets could be, ancient artifacts, powerful relics, who knows, but some say it's all buried underneath. Unfortunately, we'll probably never know because no one's allowed to go searching for it. The Tibetans hold it in such high regard that they've kept the area mostly off limits for centuries. It's much more than an archaeological site, it's a forbidden zone that explorers and historians can only dream of digging into. Moving on to the Mogao grottos in China, which are literally full of ancient art that dates back over 1,000 years. These caves are a time capsule filled with statues, murals, and scrolls shedding a lot of light on the history of Buddhism. The cave complex has over 700 caves, and a lot of them are carved into the cliffside and feature art depicting centuries of religious history. And yes, you can visit parts of this site, but some of these caves are completely off limits. And why is that? Well, because they're delicate. Some of the artwork in there is extremely fragile, and one thing people are just great at is ruining things. Too many mouth-breathing tourists start trudging through the place, and before you know it, there's Cheeto stains on the 1,000-year-old Buddha statue. Some of the caves have actually been sealed shut, and even some of the researchers who studied the site haven't had access to them. There's a lot we don't know about what's hidden deep inside the caves. What if it's not just fragile stuff though? What if there could be more? Now we're talking about something that's a little more modern, but still totally forbidden: the Vatican's secret archives. If you didn't know, the Vatican has an enormous collection of ancient documents and manuscripts and records that go back hundreds, even thousands of years. Things that are either so important or rare that they're kept locked up in an area of the Vatican that most people can't even get close to. The archives aren't just secret in the sense of having stuff hidden away. This is a literal vault where even some of the most famous historians and scholars can only access documents after being vetted and approved by the Vatican itself. And I gotta believe there's someone breathing down their neck when they're in there too. Some pieces of history have been made public over time, but a lot of what's in the archives are still heavily guarded. Who knows what's in there? Let your imagination run wild. Some think that documents related to the early church, lost historical accounts, or details about some of the more controversial events in history could be locked away in there. But unless you become Pope one day, you'll probably never get the chance to find out. And I'm not exaggerating. Some historians have spent years trying to get permission to just crack open a handful files. Next up, we have China's famous terracotta army. You've probably heard of this, the thousands of life-size statues built to guard the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. We've all seen images, we've all heard stories, but the emperor's tomb has never actually been excavated. It's been sealed for thousands of years, and while researchers have examined the army, they've never actually gotten to look inside the burial chamber of the emperor himself. The tomb is said to be packed with treasure though, and historical artifacts. Who knows what else? But here's why we still can't get in. There are a couple reasons. For one, there's fear it could be damaged. The tomb is said to be full of mercury, which was thought to protect the emperor in the afterlife, so excavating it could cause chemical reactions that would completely ruin the site. In fact, when they've dug around, they've found signs of dangerous mercury levels. And then there's the fear of booby traps. Legend has it that the emperor rigged up all these deadly traps so that his tomb wouldn't be disturbed, and some archaeologists still fear that some of these traps may be active. So even though we're all dying to know what's inside, it's not happening, at least not anytime soon. I always love saying this one, Saksai Waman. No, I'm not talking to the female members of the audience, although I'm sure you're all lovely. Saksai Waman is a stone structure that sits above Cusco, Peru, said to be one of the most amazing examples of Inca engineering. The site's made up of these huge stones, some weighing over several tons, fitted together so perfectly you can't slip a piece of paper between them, and we don't really know how the Incas moved these massive stones and placed them so perfectly like that. Some people believe there's still more buried at the site that hasn't been uncovered. Archaeologists have spent years studying it, but there are sections that are completely off limits. Some of the surrounding areas are sacred to the local people, and authorities have restricted access to these spots. One restricted area is called Chincana, a long underground cave said to connect the fortress to the Temple of the Sun. But it's also possible there's some other stuff hidden beneath the earth that no one's dug up yet. Could there be more ancient tunnels or artifacts from lost civilizations that lived even before the Incas? Well, unless more excavation is ever allowed, we'll never really know. The Library of Alexandria was once one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. Scrolls from all over the world filled with knowledge from the greatest minds of the time. But as legend has it, the library was destroyed in a series of disasters. All that knowledge just poof, vanished. Some people believe that there might still be remnants of the library buried beneath the streets of Alexandria, but since the original site was destroyed, digging there is no easy feat. Archaeologists can't just go around tearing up city blocks looking for ancient scrolls, as much as I'm sure they'd love to. Because Egypt is protective of its historical sites, it's nearly impossible for any expert to get permission to dig in the exact spots where the library might have been. But the idea that there's this entire lost collection of scrolls containing the wisdom of ancient civilizations just waiting to be found is a pretty fun idea and would make for a great Indiana Jones movie. Alright, now we're heading into real conspiracy theory territory, Antarctica. Yes, I am talking about pretty much the entire continent. Is it weird to call Antarctica an archaeological site? Maybe, but so much of it is unexplored and off limits. You also have a surprising amount of people who believe that ancient civilizations once existed there long before it froze over. Some explorers have claimed to find evidence of ancient structures buried beneath the ice, but again, Antarctica is mostly off limits to outsiders. Only certain countries are allowed to explore it, and even then, they can only study certain parts of the continent. The global treaty that governs the exploration of Antarctica has strict rules about what can and can't be explored, and there's been very little effort to dig deeper into these quote-unquote mysteries. Some also say there's stuff like hidden technology and pyramids beneath the ice, but because of the restrictions, it's hard to know for sure. Scientists seem to be more focused on studying the environment there, so it's going to take a lot to convince anyone to actually go digging for ancient civilizations, unless that hasn't already been going on and things aren't being covered up. The Bosnian pyramids are pretty controversial. Now I know what you're probably thinking, what do you mean pyramids in Bosnia? Well, some people believe that this set of mountains are actually man-made pyramids. Supposedly, if these pyramids really do exist, they're ancient, older than the Egyptian ones, and contain mysteries that could change our understanding of human history. Of course, the scientific community is pretty split on whether or not these pyramids are actually a thing. Some say they're just natural rock formations. Others insist they're evidence of some ancient construction. All the same, the site is mostly off limits for mainstream excavation. Local authorities have kept the area restricted, and there are some serious debates over whether or not it should be explored. Some argue that the whole thing could be an elaborate hoax, but either way, the site is basically forbidden for archaeologists. Mount Shasta in California is obviously gorgeous, but there's said to be a laundry list of weird things about it. The mountain's been tied to all sorts of strange legends. Supposedly, there's a lost civilization that lives deep beneath it. There have been lots of UFO sightings, and while locals might share their own theories about what's beneath the surface, access to Mount Shasta is strictly controlled. People claim there are these hidden caverns and ancient structures inside the mountain, but so far, no one's been allowed to explore the mountain's more remote areas. There's also a deep spiritual significance for Native American tribes in the area, which has led to even more restrictions on excavation. But before you go yelling at me in the comments about how you've been here before, so it's not off limits, yes, people are free to hike a lot of the area, but getting anywhere near the more mysterious parts of it, not so much. Finally, we have the Cave of Mummies in Guanajuato, Mexico. This cave is home to some of the best preserved mummies you'll ever see. The mummies were naturally preserved in the cave's dry environment, and a lot of them look eerily lifelike. Sounds weird to say lifelike when they are indeed corpses of actual people, but I mean some of them almost look like they'll just open their eyes and start walking away. Archaeologists have been allowed to study the mummies, but there's a catch. Only a select few have been able to go inside the actual cave. Many parts of the site are restricted because of how delicate the mummies are, but it's not just the mummies that are interesting, it's also the cave itself. Some think there may be more bodies hidden deeper inside the cave that haven't been uncovered yet. So what else could be lurking in the darkness? Well, unless you get special access, you'll never know for sure. Ancient tombs built high on mountains in Peru, completely off limits to the public. A mysterious castle in Turkey where strange rituals were said to have taken place. And a haunted Mayan cave. These are forbidden archaeological sites experts aren't allowed to enter. Los Pinchados is an archaeological site in Peru known for its ancient tomb. It's found in Rio Abacio National Park, high up in the mountains, where at one time the Chachapoya people lived. Chachapoya may loosely translate to the cloud forest, which would make sense. They built their tombs in caves high on the cliffs, way above the jungle floor. This of course made them difficult to reach, protecting the graves from harsh weather and looters. These tombs, which hold human remains and artifacts, have only been seen by a handful of archaeologists since the site was rediscovered in the 80s. It's remote and it's hard to get to, which is one reason why the site is so mysterious. The government also made Los Pinchados a protected area in 1990, so it's closed off to the public. On top of that, the area is home to rare animals like the yellow-tailed woolly monkey. Just another reason why the government doesn't want tons of tourists flocking to the area and disrupting it. Zirzivan Castle is an ancient fortress in southeastern Turkey built around 2,000 years ago. It was originally used by the Roman Empire, strategically placed to control the area and protect it from invaders. The site is also important because it was part of the ancient Roman road network, connecting the empire's eastern territories. But what's probably the most intriguing part of Zirzivan Castle is the discovery of a Mithraic temple. Mithraism was an ancient religion practiced by Roman soldiers, and the temple at Zirzivan is one of the best preserved examples of its kind. Inside the temple, archaeologists have found inscriptions and carvings related to the worship of Mithras, a god associated with light and truth. Makes this site pretty special, because there aren't many Mithraic temples still intact today. But there's more to this place than just being an interesting historical site. For a long time, there have been rumors surrounding the ruins. Some people claim that well-known US families, often ones mentioned in conspiracy theories, once visited the temple where they took part in secret rituals. But is that just an urban legend? Maybe. Good luck finding out for yourself though, because access to the site is restricted. Cactus Hill is an archaeological site in Virginia. It's pretty important when it comes to understanding the early history of humans in North America. It's believed to be one of the oldest places where humans lived in the Americas, dating back over 18,000 years. That's a really long time ago, during the Ice Age. Archaeologists have found tools and signs of ancient campsites here, showing that people lived in the area long before many researchers originally thought. The site is in a sandy area, which helped preserve tools and artifacts. Most of these are made of flint, showing that the people at Cactus Hill were hunter-gatherers, using these tools to hunt and survive. Cactus Hill is off limits to the public. Only researchers with special permission can dig or study it. The National Archives in the United States is home to some of the country's most important historical documents. It holds records like the US Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights, and a lot of the documents in the archives are not for public viewing. One of the most famous restricted documents is the JFK assassination files. While some information about President Kennedy's death has been revealed to the public, a lot of files remain classified to this day. The documents are carefully guarded, and only certain government officials or historians with specific clearance can access them. Files related to the development of nuclear weapons during the Cold War are also tightly controlled. The archives itself has areas that are closed off to protect sensitive materials. Some documents are too fragile to be handled or displayed even, and access is only granted to experts who are trained in preservation techniques. Sac Oyum, also known as the Haunted Maya Cave, sits near the ancient Maya city of Mayapan in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. It's a flooded cenote or sinkhole, that many locals avoid going anywhere near and will also warn outsiders to stay away from too. Based on it being known as a haunted cave, you can probably guess why. The place has a pretty eerie reputation. The area is so feared that even some archaeologists are hesitant to explore it. The place is full of bones, some animal, some human. As for why, well, the Maya may have used it for ritual purposes, or it may have just been a place where they'd bury some of their dead. Are there really that many bones down there though? Enough that it's known to be haunted? Well, a recent underwater survey led by archaeologist Bradley Russell uncovered a lot of remains scattered across 2 chambers. A lot of their skulls showed signs of having been deformed, which was a common practice among the Maya, but these weren't ordinary burials. The cenote is near the edge of Mayapan, and experts believe the bones might belong to people who were outcasts, possibly plague victims, deliberately kept away from the rest of the population. It seems to explain the trepidation people have towards the cenote today. Back in the day, no one wanted to drink the water and risk contamination, and that dread surrounding the place was just passed down generation to generation. But there's more than just skeletons here. There are also legends of a monstrous feathered serpent with a horse's head who guards the cenote. Niihau is a small private island off the coast of Hawaii. It's often called the Forbidden Island because it is. The island is privately owned by the Robinson family, and visitors are very rarely allowed, and I mean rarely. The few people who live there are mostly native Hawaiians who've lived on the island for generations, and they follow a very traditional lifestyle. The Robinsons don't want outside influences changing their way of life, so they've kept the island almost completely off limits. Even scientists and archaeologists have trouble getting permission to explore it, and the rich and famous even. Mick Jagger was famously denied access to the island. You won't find any hotels or shops here, and visitors are only allowed if they're invited, which is usually for specific reasons like research. And there are a lot of people who are just dying to do that research. There's some pretty cool things to see here, apparently, because I've never been. There are ancient Hawaiian petroglyphs here, and because the island is so isolated, it's helped preserve a lot of the historical sites, and the animals must think it's just heaven. Diego Garcia is a remote island in the British Indian Ocean Territory. It's one of the most tightly controlled and mysterious places on Earth. In the 70s, the British and US governments forcibly removed the local population to make way for this massive American military base, and ever since, the island has been fully restricted to outsiders, giving rise to a whole whack load of conspiracy theories, mainly that the government does some really bad stuff here, and I would not be surprised in the slightest. One of the most likely rumors is that the island was used by the CIA for secret rendition programs, where prisoners were kidnapped and tormented in hidden locations. The UK government addressed the issue and outright denied these claims, but they also stated 3 years later that 2 CIA torture flights did land on the island, but the documents related to this have been lost due to water damage. So yeah, that's reassuring. Not. Barren Island, part of India's Andaman and Nicobar Islands, is off limits to most visitors. It's the only active volcano in India, and one of the few along a stretch of volcanoes from Sumatra to Myanmar. The island erupted violently in 1991, wiping out a whole swath of local wildlife, so since then, access to the island has been restricted for safety reasons. Now, while you can't land on Barren Island itself, you can take a boat or ferry to see it from a safe distance. The biggest concern for keeping the island off limits is the risk from the active volcano that's on it. Explosions can happen at any time. The best time to visit the surrounding islands is between December and April, when the sea is calm, but don't expect to step foot on Barren Island itself. It remains a dangerous, protected spot with only a few allowed to study it up close. Castle Guard Cave in Banff National Park in Alberta is Canada's longest cave, and it's mostly off limits. The cave is huge and reaches deep into the mountain. Not only is it long, it's the 5th deepest cave in the country. Even getting to the cave is a challenge. Not only is it far in the backcountry, but to get to the entrance, cavers have to ski for about 12.5 miles, sometimes pulling sleds with gear. If the conditions are right, they can also take a helicopter, but that's of course not always an option. Once inside, the conditions get even tougher. The cave entrance has been known to flood during warmer months, so explorers are limited to visiting in the winter. And even then, they have to be careful. The water levels can change quickly, and if it floods unexpectedly, you could get trapped. The cave's layout isn't straightforward either. It has long, narrow passages, and the risk of getting lost is high if you're not careful and experienced. On top of that, cavers often stay underground for days at a time, camping in freezing conditions while they explore. So you're probably not allowed to go here. Only those with special permits from Parks Canada are allowed to enter at their own risk. The Superstition Mountains, just outside Phoenix, Arizona, are known for their dangerous terrain and a whole laundry list of other things, most of them bad. The only good thing said to be hidden here is the treasure. Beyond that, things get pretty ominous. The Superstition Mountains have become infamous for strange disappearances and deaths. Hikers have gone missing at an alarming rate. 4 to 5 disappear every year, according to George Johnston, president of the Superstition Mountain Museum. Among the most famous disappearances is that of Adolf Ruth, a treasure hunter who thought he'd found a map leading to the lost Dutchman's treasure, but he was never seen alive again. After he vanished, a message in a bottle was found that hinted he'd discovered the treasure but had been injured. Ruth's body was later discovered with a bullet hole right in the skull, a mile from where his body had been left. Another infamous case was that of prospector James A. Cravey, whose headless body was found in 1947, tied up in a blanket. His head was 30 feet away. So while this place may not officially be off limits, I'm telling you, you probably shouldn't go here. Vaults of treasure locked away beneath a temple in India, a secret cave in the Grand Canyon said to contain a wealth of ancient treasure and knowledge, and a massive time capsule completely sealed off, not to be opened for thousands of years. These are more forbidden archaeological sites experts aren't allowed to enter. The Padmana Baswami Temple in Kerala, India is home to one of the most mysterious and controversial discoveries in recent history, the treasure vaults. So in June of 2011, when the Supreme Court of India ordered the opening of 5 of the 6 known vaults, the world was stunned by this vast collection of gold that was inside, and other stuff too. There were crowns, diamonds, and loads of precious artifacts which had all been hidden underground. The treasure is so valuable that some consider it the largest collection of gold and precious stones ever found. But not all the vaults have been opened. Vault B, for example, has remained untouched. When officials tried to open it in 2011, they ran into some problems. There was a metal grille door followed by a wooden door and then an iron door that was jammed shut. So they brought in a locksmith, but the royal family of Travancore stepped in and stopped them. But who is the royal family of Travancore? Well, at one time they were the rulers of the kingdom of Travancore, a region in southern India that is now part of Kerala. They still have some say today, though, when it comes to legal matters like this in the region. But why did they stop them from opening the vault? Well, it turns out that the vault was linked to old religious customs and astrology, and opening it was believed to bring bad luck. There is a curse supposedly attached to this door, and I gotta say, if any door is gonna be cursed, it's gotta be this one, right? Look at this thing. Amazing looking. It looks like a death metal album cover, to be honest. In 2020, the Supreme Court ruled that Vault B would remain sealed, and Vaults G and H, which were only discovered later, still haven't been opened either. In 1909, an article in the Arizona Gazette came out with a story about a guy named G.E. Kincaid who was rafting down the Colorado River when he claimed to discover a cave high up on the Grand Canyon wall, about 2,000 feet above the river. He said that inside the cave was a stash of ancient artifacts, and not the type you'd expect to see in the area. No, these looked like Egyptian ones. Statues, tools, there were hieroglyphics on the walls, and apparently there were mummies. Now, on its own, that would be incredible, but the mummies weren't even your standard size. They were gigantic. Kincaid supposedly took a few items and sent them off to the Smithsonian, but the Smithsonian denied ever receiving anything from Kincaid. So naturally, this has led to all kinds of conspiracy theories over the years. Some believe the Smithsonian was covering up the discovery, hiding proof of some ancient Egyptian civilization existing right in the heart of North America, and that the cave was sealed off by the government with armed guards making sure no one ever got too close. But what do you all think? Could the Grand Canyon really have held these ancient secrets from some lost civilization with giants, apparently? Or was this all just a tall tale? The Crypt of Civilization is unlike any time capsule you've probably ever heard of. Instead of a small box buried underground, this is an entire room, a massive vault built to last for over 6,000 years. Nobody is allowed inside. It's not set to be opened until the year 8113. The time capsule was sealed up back in 1940 at Oglethorpe University in Georgia, and it was all the brainchild of a professor named Thornwell Jacobs. He was inspired by the discovery of ancient Egyptian tombs and wanted to leave behind a snapshot of life in the early 20th century, hoping that whatever civilization or species existed in thousands and thousands of years would find him. So what's inside this vault? Well, Jacobs and his team made sure to pack a little bit of everything. There are books, films, everyday items like a typewriter, a sewing machine, and a cash register. They also included recordings of famous speeches and radio shows, thinking that future generations might want to hear what people sounded like back then. The idea was to give anyone who finds it a taste of our world, our culture, and our technology. Of course, the problem is they had no idea that in the future everything would be up in the clouds, so who knows if these recordings will really be relevant. Still, it's an interesting concept, and I'm glad the thing exists. The Lascaux caves in France are full of prehistoric art. Too bad you can't see it up close though. These caves have been off limits for a long time. For the majority of the public anyway. Discovered back in 1940, the caves are covered in stunning paintings. There are bison, horses, and deer, all done by ancient humans around 17,000 years ago. Unfortunately, after first opening the caves to the public, the large number of visitors ended up doing a lot of damage. The air quality changed, and then mold grew, and the artwork just started to deteriorate. So in 1963, the caves were closed off to the public. And now, only a select few scientists are allowed to go in. The rest of us have to settle for seeing replicas or images that I'm showing you right here, which are still pretty cool, but obviously they're no replacement for the real thing. They've tried everything to preserve the paintings, but at the end of the day, it's the temperature and the number of people that really hurt the artwork, so they won't be opening it back up anytime soon. Next up, we have the Cave of Altamira in Spain, another incredible site with prehistoric art, but once again off limits. Discovered in 1879, Altamira's walls are covered with bison paintings, some of the oldest in Europe, this time around 36,000 years old. The artwork is so detailed and well preserved, it's hard not to be amazed by it. At first, people could visit, but like Lascaux caves in France, all the visitors started to take their toll on the quality of the paintings. The carbon dioxide in the air and the humidity affected the artwork, so the cave was shut down to the public in 1977. Since then, only a few experts have been allowed to study it, and again, there's a replica you can visit, but the real thing is closed off, and it'll probably stay that way. In Verdun, France, there's a place called the Red Zone, or Zone Rouge, that's off limits to everyone, and for very good reason. This area was completely transformed during World War I, which turned what was once farmland into a raging battlefield. Millions of artillery shells rained down, tearing up the landscape, flattening towns, and leaving a mess of munitions scattered everywhere. After the war, the French government decided that it was just too dangerous to rebuild the villages or to try and rehabilitate the land, so they relocated everyone, and the area was sealed off. Even today, long after the war, it's illegal to enter. The land is just littered with unexploded shells and toxic chemicals, and while they've been trying to clean it up for years, some say it could take centuries to finish. The Ark of the Covenant, one of the Bible's most mysterious relics, was said to hold the Ten Commandments and was built around 3,000 years ago. After the Babylonian Empire conquered the Israelites, it disappeared from history. Nobody knows if it was destroyed, stolen, or hidden away. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark is now kept in the St. Mary of Zion Cathedral in Aksum, specifically in the Chapel of the Ark. But only one person, a monk, is allowed to see it. He's considered the sole guardian of this sacred artifact. And some believe the Ark in Aksum is just a replica, but no one else has been allowed inside to confirm, making this place an absolute mystery. The Great Pyramid of Giza is about as iconic as it gets, but for how much of a tourist destination it's become, it's not easily accessed, even for some of the world's most well-respected archaeologists. Some areas are completely off limits. One of the most restricted zones is the Queen's Chamber, a narrow passageway near the center of the pyramid, and while most can visit the Grand Gallery, which leads to the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber has been sealed off, and no one's really sure what's behind it. Then there's the lower shafts. Beneath the King's Chamber, there are these shafts that go down into the depths of the pyramid, and those haven't been fully explored either. In the 90s, a robot was sent down one of them and reached a dead end. Until this day, no one knows for sure what might be further along. Angkor Fort in Rajasthan, India is one of the most famous and arguably the most haunted sites in the country. Built in the 16th century by a ruler, the fort was meant as a tribute to his son, Man Singh. At one point, it was home to over 10,000 people, but today, the town is completely abandoned, and living there is strictly prohibited. In fact, you can't even go there after sunset. Tourists are allowed to visit during the day, but when it gets dark, everyone has to leave. Why? Well, the place is believed to be haunted, if not full-on cursed. It's earned the title of the most haunted place in India, and it may not just be folklore. There are reports of people who have snuck into the fort at night and just never came back. Others have heard eerie noises, seen strange figures, some even claim to have come face to face with malevolent spirits. So what happened? Why is the place cursed? Well, one story goes that a priest who dabbled in black magic fell for a stunning princess from Angkor who had plenty of admirers. One day he followed her to the market and tried to give her a love potion, but she turned him down, tossing it onto a big rock. The rock then rolled onto him, crushing it. And just before he died, he cursed the village, dooming it to ruin. Now, Petra in Jordan is probably one of the most famous ancient cities in the world. You've probably seen pictures of the treasury, which is carved right into the side of a mountain. It's pretty spectacular. There's nothing else like it in the world. But while most of Petra is open to visitors, there are huge chunks of it that aren't. There are tombs and chambers that have been sealed off, and only a select few are allowed to explore them. The Jordanian government is really careful about what they let people do with Petra. They don't want any damage done to the sacred areas, and some believe that excavating certain parts could disrupt local communities. There's even talk that there are hidden vaults and treasures waiting to be found. Gyros Island in Greece might not be on most people's vacation lists, and there's a good reason for that. The island, which sits in the Aegean Sea, has been off limits for a long time. It wasn't always like this, though. For centuries, it was a place of exile, mainly for political prisoners. Under military rule in the 20th century, it became notorious as a site where people were sent to suffer in isolation. The island's history as a prison camp has led to it being mostly abandoned, with only a few scattered ruins still standing today. There's a lot of mystery about what's hidden there now, but the government continues to keep the island restricted. You can't just hop on a boat and explore the old prison buildings, and that's because it's not just the prison history of the island that makes it forbidden. The island is also home to a sensitive environmental area, which is why the Greek government has kept it sealed off. The ancient ruins of Palmyra in Syria were once one of the most important cities in the Roman Empire, a crossroads for trade and culture. Its huge temples and towering columns were seen as one of the world's most breathtaking sights, but nowadays, Palmyra is sorta caught up in the middle of a conflict, making it one of the most inaccessible archaeological sites on Earth. After the rise of extremist groups like ISIS, a lot of the city has been destroyed in an attempt to erase its history. As for the ruins themselves, some areas are still under the control of different military factions. The site is filled with unexploded ordnance and threats from armed groups, which means any visits have to be carefully controlled and monitored. Teotihuacan, just outside Mexico City, is one of the largest and most mysterious ancient cities ever built. Known for its massive pyramids like the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, in its prime, from around 1 to 500 CE, Teotihuacan was the largest city in the Americas. There were once 125,000 people or more living here. At some point, the city was abandoned, though. And sure, today, tourists do do flock here year-round to see it, but there are certain parts of Teotihuacan that are completely off limits to the public. And why is that? Well, the site is still a huge treasure trove of ancient artifacts, some of which are kept sealed for preservation and study. In fact, a lot of the chambers under the pyramids are inaccessible, and archaeologists are still uncovering new finds under the surface. And as if that wasn't enough, the entire city itself still has some mystery to it. No one really knows who built it or why it was abandoned around the 7th century. Some excavations are permitted, but a lot of the city is off limits, keeping its deep secrets hidden for the foreseeable future. The Petra temples are some of the oldest freestanding structures in the world, dating back to around 3600 BCE. These temples, found on the island of Malta, really show off the ancient engineering and religious practices of the people. They line up perfectly with things like the solstices. Now, parts of the site are open to visitors, but there are other parts that are strictly off limits, and that's because these temples are considered incredibly fragile. The delicate stone structures have been eroded by centuries of weather, and the constant flow of tourists puts them at risk for even more damage. People are still working to preserve what's left of the temple complex, so some areas, like certain chambers and altars, are off limits to keep them from getting damaged even more. The Gigantea temples, found on the island of Gozo, Malta, are another set of ancient megalithic structures built between 3600 and 3200 BCE. These temples predate even the Egyptian pyramids, making them some of the oldest religious sites on the planet. But what makes them even more mysterious is that some parts of the site are off limits to the public, and not just for preservation reasons. The temples were built to be part of a larger network of sacred sites, and there are still unexplored areas within the temple complex. Archaeologists have only scratched the surface of what could be hidden beneath the ground, including artifacts that could help them learn even more about the ancient people who built the structures. The island of Gozo itself is a quiet, relatively undiscovered spot, and so much of it is still off limits or carefully monitored for both historical and environmental reasons. Crac de Chevalier, a medieval fortress in Syria, is one of the most well-preserved examples of Crusader architecture in the world. This massive structure was built in the 12th century. It was an important stronghold during the Crusades. It's open to visitors again, but that hasn't always been the case. Because of the Syrian civil war, it became a difficult and dangerous place to access, and parts of it were damaged from shelling. The government recaptured it in 2014, and ever since, conservation work has been underway here. The fortress sits on top of a hill, offering this spectacular view of the surrounding landscape, and that, combined with its labyrinthine design and the towers and dungeons and beautiful courtyards, it looks like a Dungeons and Dragons castle. It's just beautiful. Even though people can come and see this place for themselves again, there are still restrictions. A lot of the fortress is still off limits to the public, with access restricted by both the Syrian government and UNESCO. Unfortunately, the political situations made it really tough to preserve the whole site, and it's still taking a hit. Up in northern Syria, there's a place known as the Dead Cities, and it really lives up to the name. These are a bunch of abandoned villages from the 1st to 7th centuries. Some of them, like Sargia and Al-Bara, are still in surprisingly good shape. You can see stone houses, churches, and old structures that have stood the test of time, but again, because of the lingering political climate in Syria, these ruins are mostly off limits. So these abandoned villages have kind of faded into the background, except for the archaeologists who still visit. In fact, some parts of the Dead Cities are so untouched, it's almost said to really feel like you're walking through history. But because it's in a conflict zone, it's not a place people can just casually visit. Pompeii, we've all heard of it. It's on a lot of people's bucket lists. The city was buried in ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, and because of that, it's become this grim snapshot, with the final moments of a once grand city completely frozen in time. But while it's super famous and popular with tourists, there are parts of Pompeii that you're not allowed to enter. Some areas are closed for preservation and others for safety. Those old buildings and frescoes are really fragile, and the constant stream of visitors doesn't help. There are certain spots where ongoing digs are happening as well. Yeah, archaeologists are still finding new things here. There's just so many layers of ash. Rome is like a living museum. You've
got the Colosseum, the Roman Forum, the Pantheon, pretty much the world's greatest hits of ancient ruins. But what most people don't know is that there are even more ancient ruins buried under the city, tucked away in places that people like you and me aren't allowed to be. Some of these sites are restricted because they're still being dug up, and others are kept sealed up to protect some of the more fragile artifacts. For example, there's an underground area near the Roman Forum that holds the remains of old temples, but it's not something you could just walk into. You need special permission. Rome's rich history is packed under layers, making it a really fascinating place to visit, but also one where there's a lot that the average tourist will just never see. Hopefully some of the sites will be opened eventually, but for now, pictures will just have to do. Jebel Barkal is this incredible mountain and ancient site in Sudan, sitting near the Nile River. It used to be the heart of the kingdom of Napta, which was a huge empire that at one time even rivaled Egypt. The place is full of pyramids, temples, and royal tombs, but unfortunately parts of it are totally off limits. The main temple is open to visitors, but a lot of the site is restricted because of both political issues and the delicate nature of the ruins. The thing is, there's still a lot beneath the surface that hasn't been explored yet. So even though some of the site is accessible, Jebel Barkal is still one of Africa's most mysterious spots. Archaeologists have just recently uncovered a massive pyramid at the Chupacigaro archaeological site just a kilometer away from the ancient Corral ruins in Peru. This newly found pyramid is believed to be an extension of the Corral city, which is famous for being one of the earliest advanced civilizations in the Americas. The pyramid had been buried under earth and shrubs for thousands of years, but these new excavations revealed vertical stones known as huancas, marking the corners of a ceremonial building. The pyramid's footprint is rectangular, with a central staircase that at one time would have led to a towering summit. There are also 12 smaller areas spread across hilltops, which would have been used for public ceremonies or events. Surrounding the pyramid are the remains of houses too, so it looked like this place was a kind of smaller urban area, a kind of suburb of the main city of Corral. Another really exciting discovery here was a massive geoglyph, a human head design measuring 62 meters long and 30 meters wide. Archaeologists recently discovered the ruins of an ancient Mayan city in the jungle of southeastern Mexico, just a short hike from a major road. The city, named Valeriana, is believed to have been home to between 30,000 and 50,000 people from around 750 to 850 CE. The ruins were found with the help of LiDAR technology, which uses laser light from drones to scan the ground. The city spans over 6 square miles. They found 2 major centers with large buildings about a mile apart. These areas were connected by houses and causeways. The LiDAR images also revealed 2 plazas with temple pyramids, a ball court, and a reservoir. At some point the city was abandoned though, likely because of droughts. 2 ancient cities were recently discovered in the mountains of Uzbekistan, high above sea level. The cities were found along the Silk Road, an ancient trade route that stretched about 4,000 miles, dating back over 1,000 years. The first city, called Tashbalak, was about 29 acres in size. The second, Taganbulak, was massive, around 10 times larger, almost 3 times the size of Vatican City. Once again, they used LiDAR technology here. Researchers were able to map the cities in detail. Now, I mentioned LiDAR before, and it'll be coming up again, so here's a very brief and simplified explanation on how it works. LiDAR works by shooting laser beams at the ground and then measuring how long it takes for the light to bounce back, which then allows archaeologists to see the terrain and structures beneath the surface. Scans are then turned into 3D models, which in this case showed plazas and homes and other buildings, which would have been used by travelers and traders passing through the area. Acomtun is an ancient Mayan city on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, but it was only recently discovered in June of 2023 by archaeologists from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History. The team, led by Dr. Ivan Sprajic, found the city hidden deep in the jungle where no one had explored before. They used LiDAR to detect the ruins, which include a number of pyramids around 15 meters tall, stone columns, and a ball court used for an ancient Maya game. Pottery fragments found at the site hint that it was inhabited by the Maya people from around 600 CE to 800 CE, but the city fell into decline by 1000 CE, around the time of the classic Maya collapse. Akhum was named after the stone columns that are spread throughout the city, with Akhum meaning stone column in the Mayan language. It's found in a remote area called the Balamku Ecological Conservation Zone, a place so thick with jungle that it had sat hidden, since it was abandoned a little over 1,000 years ago. In 2023, archaeologists made an amazing discovery off the coast of Pozzuoli, Italy, an ancient Nabatean temple. The city had been sought after for centuries, but it wasn't until recently that they finally found it, almost by accident, while mapping the sea floor. This 2,000-year-old temple was dedicated to Dashara, the chief god of the Nabatean civilization, which was around from the 4th century BCE till about 106 CE, when they were absorbed into the Roman Empire. The temple, now submerged underwater thanks to volcanic activity, contains inscriptions like Dusari Sacrum, meaning consecrated to Dashara. Researchers found 2 rooms under the sea. One of them contained 2 marble altars, which had probably been used to worship him. The Nabateans were also known for their stunning tombs in Petra, Jordan, including the famous treasury. Stephen Tuck, a Roman historian, said, "It makes perfect sense that the Nabateans would be in Puteoli as a community of traders. This discovery shows that the Nabateans used the temple as both a place of worship and a hub for trade, exchanging goods like gold, ivory, and perfumes. The temple was part of their far-reaching trade network, which stretched from northern Arabia to Italy." In 2022, Spain's worst drought in decades did have an upside. It led to a really cool archaeological find, a prehistoric stone circle known as the Dolmen of Guadalperol, or the Spanish Stonehenge, finally revealed itself after years of being submerged underwater. The circle, made up of large megalithic stones, dates back to around 5000 BCE. As the water level in the reservoir dropped to just 28%, the stones, which had been submerged since 1963, became fully visible once again. Spanish Stonehenge was first discovered by German archaeologist Hugo Oberheimer in 1926, but the area was flooded as part of a development project under Spain's dictator Francisco Franco. Since then, the site has only reappeared a few times. Archaeologist Enrique Cadillo described it as a rare chance to study the site before it gets submerged again. And there are a number of things scattered across Western Europe like this, but we still don't fully understand who built them or why. But some researchers believe they were used as tombs, as human remains have been found near similar sites. In Athens, workers laying natural gas pipelines near the Acropolis came across an ancient marble statue of a young man, found buried almost upright in a brick-lined pit. The statue is in surprisingly good condition, except for the crack running along its torso and the fact that it's missing its head. Other than that, though, it looks pretty good. The statue resembles depictions of Hermes, the messenger god in Greek mythology. It's believed that it may have once decorated a wealthy Roman-era home in Athens. The statue could be a Roman copy of an original sculpture from the 5th century BCE, but its exact date hasn't been confirmed yet. This discovery was made near the southern end of the Acropolis, not far from the Odeon of Herodes Atticus, an ancient Roman concert hall. The area around the find was once home to fancy houses adorned with beautiful artwork belonging to wealthier people of ancient Athens, so the location makes sense. Archaeologists digging at Pompeii have come across a fancy private bathhouse along with some other amazing finds showing just how rich and luxurious life was before Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE. The bathhouse was huge with a pool that could fit 30 people, hot and cold rooms, and stunning artwork, but there's also a dark side. The boiler room, where slaves worked in unbearable heat to keep everything running smoothly, was also found, and then came a really crazy find. Archaeologists found the remains of 2 people in a tiny room near the bathhouse. One was an older woman of higher status, curled up in bed, clutching gold coins and jewelry. The other was a young man, probably a servant or slave, who would have died being crushed by a collapsing wall as the eruption started. His hands were still holding keys, while the woman likely watched him die before facing her own death. That is pretty horrific, and it's only the beginning. More and more excavation is going on at Pompeii, so with more digs underway, who knows what else will turn up in the very near future. During a severe drought in Texas, ancient dinosaur tracks were revealed at Dinosaur Valley State Park. about 140 kilometers southwest of Dallas. The tracks, which are over 113 million years old, are preserved in the bed of the Paluxy River. The footprints belong to an Acrocanthosaurus, a carnivorous dinosaur about 4 meters tall or just over 13 feet, weighing about 6 tons. Park Superintendent Jeff Davis explained that the tracks, which are usually covered by water, gravel, and sandbars, were exposed thanks to the drought. The tracks are 3-toed prints similar to the ones made by the more famous T-Rex, only much older. The discovery thrilled dinosaur fans, including Paul Baker, who remembers exploring the riverbed with his father, a park ranger, looking for tracks. His father was the first to find these footprints during a previous drought, and the site was named in his honor. Along with the Acrocanthosaurus, the park also has tracks from other dinosaurs like the massive Sauroposeidon, a herbivore that stood 18 meters tall, that's about 59 feet, and weighed about 39 tons. The footprints were made when the area was a shallow inland sea during the Cretaceous period, long before the land became the prairies we see in Texas today. Cahokia was once a huge city right in North America, around 1,000 years ago. It sat in what's now Illinois, near St. Louis. At its peak, it was home to as many as 20,000 people, making it one of the biggest cities in the world at the time. The people who lived there were part of the Mississippian culture, a group of Native American societies that lived around the southeastern and midwestern US. They were really good at building huge earth mounds, some as tall as a 10-story building. The biggest one, Monk's Mound, is so massive it covers 14 acres and is about 100 feet tall. Not only did lots of people live here, it was also a hub for trade, with goods coming in from all over the region. They were experts in farming too, especially growing corn, which was the staple of their diet. The city had a really organized layout too, with streets, plazas, and public spaces, but then Cahokia was abandoned around the 14th century. What most archaeologists think is that a series of massive floods hit. By the time settlers showed up, the city was gone, though the mounds were still there. It wasn't until the 19th century, though, that people started realizing just how important Cahokia had really been. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus was an ancient Greek temple in what is now Turkey, supposed to be one of the grandest temples ever built. It was designed to be massive, imagine 127 columns, each one over 60 feet tall, and a marble structure so impressive that it was listed as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But as grand as this place was, the temple was never fully completed. It was burned down in 356 BCE by a man named Herostratus, who was trying to gain fame by burning it down. After the fire, they tried to rebuild it, but it just kept running into problems. The area was constantly under threat of invaders, and political instability kept interfering with the reconstruction. Over the centuries, it went through a bunch of different rebuilds, but no one ever had the chance to finish the full thing. And finally, the Goths, a group of Germanic tribes that played a huge part in the fall of the Western Roman Empire, attacked and destroyed what remained of it in 262 CE. And that was pretty much the end of the temple. Today, all we've got are foundations and little fragments of the last temple, a reminder of something that could have been much more. When the Colossus of Rhodes was built, it was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, towering over 100 feet tall. It was an incredible feat of engineering and a symbol of Rhodes' power. The statue, designed to honor the sun god Helios, took 12 years to build, but it didn't even last 56 years. A massive earthquake hit it in 226 BCE, toppling the statue into pieces. And then it was just never rebuilt. You'd think the Rhodians would rush to put it back up, but they didn't. Some say it was just too expensive, others think the statue's size just made it too hard to rebuild. Makes sense. They just spent over a decade building the thing for it to collapse just a little over 50 years later. They were probably just like, forget it, there's other things we gotta focus our energy on. And unfortunately, unlike a lot of the other places you'll see on this list, there's nothing left of this statue today. The remaining parts were sold off as scrap way back in the day, so all we have are stories and a few ancient sketches. And based on
those, it does look like the thing was pretty awe-inspiring. We all know the Great Wall of China as one of the world's most iconic ancient structures, and as amazing as it was originally going to be even more grand. Not all of it is finished. Sure, we've got the grand sections that have been restored and preserved, but there are a lot of long stretches of the wall that were never fully completed. The wall wasn't all built at once, and some parts of it were built hastily. Different dynasties worked on it over the centuries, but the work was always interrupted by rebellions and logistical problems. Some sections were abandoned halfway through because the resources just weren't there anymore, or there was simply no need to continue, and in some cases entire stretches of the wall were neglected and left to fall apart. The most famous parts of the wall were heavily restored during the Ming Dynasty, but if you travel further out, you'll find these abandoned, incomplete sections with crumbling stones and wildlife growing around them. Not what you'd typically picture when you think of the Great Wall of China. The Ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BCE, was an enormous stepped pyramid meant to honor the moon god Nana. It was a massive undertaking for the Sumerians, and it was supposed to make it one of the greatest structures of the ancient world, but like many ancient projects, the full vision never came to fruition. The Sumerians were very advanced when it came to a lot of things, but with all the invasions and internal conflict, their civilization eventually just collapsed. So by the time the ziggurat was nearly complete, things had gotten bad enough that the resources to finish the structure just weren't there anymore and had to be diverted elsewhere. And as the empire continued to fall apart, the ziggurat sat incomplete and much of the surrounding area was abandoned. But fortunately, the remnants of the ziggurat are still standing today. The unfinished obelisk in Aswan is just one giant piece of stone that was meant to be erected as an obelisk. If it had been completed, it would have been the largest obelisk in Egypt, measuring 138 feet and weighing about 1,200 tons. Given ancient Egypt's track record of incredible giant structures, this one would have been pretty awesome. But of course, it was never finished. The ancient Egyptians had started carving it out of the rock, but while it was still in the quarry, the stone cracked. The workers had no choice but to abandon the project. So today, you can still visit this gigantic chunk of stone that was originally going to be standing upright. It's just sitting there, still attached to the bedrock. It's kind of sad, right? The fact that this thing was so close to being finished, but then, whether it was a technical failure or just bad luck, it was left unfinished forever. The Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus was meant to be the grandest temple in all of Rome, dedicated to the king of the gods. It was supposed to outshine all other temples in the ancient world, but the final version of the temple was never fully realized. It started construction in the 6th century BCE, but after a series of political issues and with the growing instability in Rome, the project just didn't go as planned. The temple went through a number of phases, and only parts of it were ever finished. The temple was looted, burned, and rebuilt tons of times over the centuries, with different emperors taking on the project but never fully completing its original design. By the time it was finally abandoned, it wasn't even close to what it had been meant to be. It's this unfinished dream of Roman grandeur that never really saw its full potential, and is now just another reminder of how politics, power struggles, and time itself can shape the legacy of a civilization. The Tower of Babel is a story a lot of people know from the Bible. It was this giant tower built to reach the heavens, but according to the story, God wasn't too happy about human ambition and scattered the people, confusing their language and causing the project to fall apart. It's a cautionary tale about becoming too prideful, that no matter how intelligent and ambitious you are, you're still human, no match for the guy upstairs. And it attempts to explain why people around the globe speak different languages, of course. But regardless of how you feel about the moral of the story and the religious side of it, could there be a historical event that it's pulling from? Did the Babylonians try to build something massive, something that would rival anything that had come before it? Well, some historians think the Tower of Babel was inspired by the ziggurats in Mesopotamia, like the one we talked about before, which were big, step pyramids used for religious ceremonies. But the tower was never finished, whether it was because of the political collapse of the Babylonian Empire or the project was just overly ambitious to begin with. We'll never know. Hadrian's Wall is another unfinished project that spans 73 miles across northern Britain, built by the Romans to protect the empire from the Picts, who were the ancient people of what is now Scotland. The wall wasn't completed all at once, and in some areas it's pretty clear the Romans just didn't finish what they started. They clearly hit some serious roadblocks, mainly politics
politics, and war. Scotland was just that last place they could never break into. Plus the huge challenge of constructing something so massive across very uneven terrain. It was just too tough. Some parts were thrown together quickly, other sections were just left unfinished. Even now, the wall is a bit of a mix of finished and unfinished bits. It's a reminder that even the most impressive military projects don't always turn out the way they're planned. The Romans were incredible engineers, but even they couldn't pull off Hadrian's Wall the way they'd imagined. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem is one of the most famous religious structures in the world, but the build didn't go as smoothly as many think. At first, the design was actually way bigger and more elaborate, but with all the political chaos and changes in leadership during the 7th century, parts of the dome had to be scaled back. The original idea, with all its detailed mosaics and huge dome, had to be adjusted, and even after it was finished, there were always parts being restored or rebuilt. The unfinished parts of the Dome of the Rock don't just show how tough the construction was, they also reflect the political and religious changes going on in Jerusalem at the time, and that actually makes it pretty interesting. Angkor Wat is the largest religious monument in the world, and it still wasn't finished. The temple complex was first built in the early 12th century by the Khmer king Suryavarman II. It was supposed to be a grand tribute to the Hindu god Vishnu, and the plans were massive, multi-level galleries, detailed carvings everywhere, towering buildings. But as big as the plans were, the temple itself was never really finished. The Khmer Empire was on the decline during its construction, and internal power struggles along with the constant threat of invasion slowed down the work. The temple went through all these phases of construction, but a lot of the intricate work just stopped, likely because the resources had dried up and the empire just weren't able to support such an ambitious project. By the time the empire fell in the 15th century, the temple was still incomplete, but who cares? I mean, whatever, it's an incredible sight today, especially now with all the vines and stuff growing over parts of it. Seeing this place in person would be absolutely breathtaking.